All right, everybody, welcome here to the Realize Truth podcast. I am your host, Frank Michael, with my co-host, Keldy McDonald. Keldy, how are we doing today?
We're good, and we're excited to have Thomas here with us today. Can't wait to hear everything
Absolutely.
about Morozko.
Absolutely. Guys, we have a very, very, very special guest who I have an honor and privilege to get to know recently, and just really, really awesome guy, and really excited for you guys to hear his wealth of knowledge and just fascinating point of view of life in so many ways. This is Dr. Thomas Seager. Dr. Thomas Seager teaches engineering at business practices at Arizona State University. He's the co-founder of Morozko Forge LLC and the co-inventor of the world's first ice bath that makes its own ice. That's right. It makes its own ice. There's other competitors out there, but none of them make their own ice, which is why I bought my own. Dr. Seager's unique expertise in leadership, entrepreneurship, organizational communication, and human resilience has prompted him to recognize his research around a novel concept called self-actual engineering that applies engineering principles to a full realization of human potential. Informed by his own journey from obesity to health in middle age, Dr. Seager delivers lectures on the use of deliberate cold exposure to maintain metabolic and physiological health. Dr. Seager, it's an honor and a pleasure. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Frank. It's nice to meet you, Keldy. I'm
Sweet.
happy to be here. Yeah.
Yes, yes. So let's dive right into this. A lot of people who are familiar with my work, and there's plenty that aren't, know that I'm one of those nuts that loves to go sit in freezing water, frozen water that you break up and get into the water. So I guess my first question to you, Dr. Seeger, is what was your aha moment in realizing that the cold is our friend? Like, what was the pivoting point in your life where you really like you were actually introduced to the concept, and then to where you embraced the concept, and now it became a way of life?
Before I was introduced, I was primed for the concept. So let me tell you what I mean by that. My childhood experiences, I come from a very educated academic family. My parents met when they were in grad school at Harvard, and part of their politics was very sensitive towards issues of the environment. They moved from Massachusetts to Pittsburgh. Recycling was important. Air pollution was important. I was raised in Pittsburgh. So you got to imagine the way that I was tuned by my childhood was towards sustainability and a clean planet, lots of wonderful things. I remember binning up the newspapers and doing the recycling with my mother, when I was a kid in the early 70s, before that was even a thing. But one of the things that my mother bought into was a book called Diet for a Small Planet. Turns out she didn't know anything about nutrition, because the sustainability ethic, this environmental ethic, often gets confused with an agenda that is antithetical to nutritional health, that we should be eating seed oils, that somehow margarine is better for the environment and better for your body than, for example, butter. My mother bought into that, and that meant I was raised a fat kid, fat adolescent, and I grew out of it somewhat in college and back into it as a middle-aged man. Well, then I had a kid. When he was 6, he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And I knew that his life depended upon my knowledge of how to take care of him, his insulin injections, his blood sugars. And I started to re-educate myself about nutrition. Everything that I learned as a child turned out to be wrong. Margarine is terrible for you. The idea that we've got to be eating more grains is not healthy for us. It's not sustainable from an agricultural perspective. And I got into Dr. Atkins. I got into learning about insulin, about metabolism, because I wanted to do a better job caring for my child. None of this had to do with cold exposure, but we were all living up in northern New York, in New Hampshire, in western New York, all places that had good traditions of cold winter sports. Well, it was, you got to fast forward about 20 years when my wife and I split. And we did a good job raising our kids, raising our family. But we reached a point where we had different visions of our life. And I had to do some real soul searching about who I was, where I was in life, and what I wanted to be. I started reading everything. So first I was primed for an appreciation of deliberate cold exposure because I'd already been thinking about metabolism and insulin. And then I read this book by Mike Cernovich called Guerrilla Mindset. And the only thing I really remember from the book is that he recommended you do cold showers. Now, I was at a point in my life where I'm like, okay, I'm going to try everything and anything that I can get my hands on. I'm going to experiment. I'm going to see how do I make my life better. So I'm going to try these cold showers. But you know, in Phoenix, because you just moved here, in the winter, a cold shower is maybe 62 degrees. I hated it. I mean, it's not even that cold. Now, when I have perspective on it, I'm like, wow, that was pretty wimpy of me. But the fact is, cold showers would make me angry. So I'd be in the shower and I'd be like, God dang you, Mike Cernovich, you know, but I was doing something because the book was pretty persuasive and I thought it might help me. Then my former student, Jason, we'd stayed in touch ever since he graduated. He was a civil engineer at ASU. He started reading about Wim Hof and some people in a Burning Man group here in Phoenix were doing ice baths. It's warming up. The tap water in Phoenix isn't even cold anymore. So we get a horse trough, we get some ice. We say, let's give this a try. And completely different experience. The shower is miserable and wretched, but the whole body immersion in the cold water created this meditative calm over me. Then you get out and you're experiencing this feeling of ecstasy and energy, and you want to work out and you want to get all these things done. Well, it took a couple of weekends for Jason and I to experience that before we got tired of going down to, you know, the Circle K or whatever and getting 200 pounds of ice. Because when it's 110 degrees in Jason's backyard, you don't have a lot of time to get your ice into your trough and to have this whole experience. We said, well, we're engineers, you know, we ought to be able to do this. But Frank, instead of taking the easy way out, you know, buying a bunch of things off the shelf and getting like an 80% solution, minimum viable product, we started taking apart freezers and trying to teach ourselves everything we need to know about refrigerants. I took a EPA certification test so I could buy the real refrigerant. We could make our own. It was a good thing because it harkened right back to my grad school. It was a lot of stuff I worked on with environmental protection related to the ozone layer and greenhouse gases and the proper handling of refrigerants. The next thing you know, we built our own freezer system. We made ice. It cost me, you know, over $20,000 in parts and equipment and stuff that I didn't even know. We had a party. Word got out that we invented this bath that makes its own ice. And we were contacted by somebody who wanted to buy one. Well, you know, we were just making it for us. But as soon as the market, I mean, we didn't even know there was a market because there wasn't. As soon as you start getting a signal saying, well, this is solving a problem for other people too. You are not alone in this. We started to think, well, we might be able to do, you know, maybe a couple of these a month and get our friends hooked up with some. It turns out we were inventing something that didn't exist. And a lot of people really wanted it. By then, I was going deeper and deeper into my own journey, my own understanding of metabolism and the benefits of cold exposure, because what was I, maybe 52. I'm going to be 56 this year. And I'm at an age where a lot of guys start breaking down. I'd had a blood test like I'm supposed to do. I had my PSA, so prostate specific antigen measured. It came back over 7. And I'm like, well, I got to learn a lot of things here. What does over 7 mean, for goodness sakes? And right away, the doctors want to do a biopsy. You get a PSA like that. I wrote an article about it. You might have read it. And I said, before I do anything, I'm going to start talking to a bunch of other guys. I talked to some older guys, some guys my age, some younger guys. And it was amazing how little we actually talk about health, especially our reproductive health. We don't share anywhere near enough information. They were telling me their stories of biopsies, of surgeries, of having their prostate removed. And I remember I was writing in my journal and I'm like, no way, I'm not. If this thing kills me, it's going to take a while, because I read that these cancers almost are always really slow. So I have some time to experiment, and I'm going to do everything I can to avoid going under the knife. Well, it turns out ketosis, the ice bath, which generates ketones, intermittent fasting, a lot of the things that were related to deliberate cold exposure really help with managing cancer, managing the prostate, managing inflammation. I got my PSA down from over 7 to less than 1, doing the ice baths and the ketogenic diet and the intermittent fasting. So I came in at 0.8.
Can I ask you, when you were diagnosed with that, how overweight were you at the time?
I was coming down from about 245 to 250. And by then I was about 215. So I had done a good job. I went on what I call the great food diet. If it isn't great food, I don't want to eat it. So, I mean, it wasn't like I was eschewing carbs or desserts at that point, but it had to be great. And I would skip lunch because it's really hard to get a great lunch, you know? That helped me out a lot. I was doing some exercises. I wrote a little bit about that too. And so I was taking my fitness more seriously. It wasn't until I got that clean bill from the PSA that I thought I may really be onto something. Meanwhile, Morozko Forge is growing. And there's a guy in Oregon, his name is Dean Hall. He contacted us and he thought that what we had invented was amazing because he swears that cold water swimming cured his leukemia. He'd already lost his wife to brain cancer. And when he was diagnosed with leukemia, lymphoma all over his body, you can see it, there's a picture on our website. He was despondent. He said, to him, it was a death sentence because his doctor said, there's no cure, there's no treatment, there's nothing I can do, but try and extend the quality of your life for as long as you can. And Dean said, well, I want to do something because I felt so powerless about my wife's diagnosis and her death. And I feel powerless now. I'm not ready to resign myself to going quietly. I want to do something to inspire other cancer patients. Doc's like, well, what is that? He goes, I'm going to swim the entire length of the Shannon River in Ireland. That's where my people are from. I'm going to die on my own ancestral soil if I have to, but I'm going to go out on my own terms. And the doctor said, I don't know, Dean, you know, it's great to have a goal. So check in with me. Let me know how that goes. I don't want to hold you back. So Dean starts training in Oregon at the Willamette River. He's the first person to have swum the entire length of the Willamette River. And you got to imagine he's in the water for hours at a time. He's got a wetsuit, but it's all cold water swimming for him. His daughter follows him with a canoe. She's the support team. He trains for, and I forget exactly, but months. He goes back to his doctor and he says, I think I'm ready. I think I'm ready to take on the Shannon. And the doctor says, well, let's get you checked out. Doctor says, Dean, where did your cancer go? The Dean says, you tell me, doc. The doctor says, if I hadn't done the initial diagnosis myself, if I hadn't pulled your blood test, if I hadn't seen your swollen lymph nodes, I'd swear you were misdiagnosed because there's now no trace of cancer in your system. Dean tells me this story. And I'm like, well, you know, I don't know. I guess because I got my PSA down, Dean cured his cancer. I can't contradict his experience. Miracles happen. But I went back to the library and I found a book called Tripping Over the Truth by Travis Christofferson. And it helped me realize that diabetes was just scratching the surface of what we really need to know about metabolism, about brown fat, and about ketones. Finally, I wrote an article about here are the plausible mechanisms of how Dean's dedication to his cold water swimming would starve his cancer of the glucose it needs, because most cancers can only metabolize glucose and produce ketones in his bloodstream that are the body's natural chemotherapy. My life has changed because since meeting Dean, having my experience and having his, and his is much worse, but they're analogous. I've done article after article. There has been miracle after miracle that people have experienced. Jason's wife, Adrienne, she used to have Hashimoto's. She was on multiple medications and the doctors told her that she would have Hashimoto's hypothyroid for the rest of her life. She started a program of cold exposure. She cleaned up her diet. There's no trace of any Hashimoto's. She used to be allergic to eggs. After 2 years of cold exposure, she can eat eggs now. And she's not alone. She's the second person I've heard from who says, my food allergies have disappeared. So there is so much more that we need to know. As I find these case studies, and then I tell these stories, and then I back it up with the science. Like, here's how something like this can happen. Adrian's a great case study. It turns out that brown fat and the thyroid, they work together in your body to stabilize one another. If your thyroid is out of control, it could be because you don't have any more brown fat. Adrian grew up in Florida. She lives in Phoenix. She's got no cold exposure. Her brown fat, before the invention of a special type of PET scan that could even detect brown fat, and this was 10 years ago, a little bit more now, we thought that adults just didn't have it. We thought kids have it and then you lose it, you grow out of it, and that's the end of it. But that's not true. When you get cold exposure, you either retain your brown fat or you can recruit it. And it was the lack of her brown fat that caused her thyroid to destabilize. So now you can see how there's a whole cadre, millions of people need to know that what's going on when they're not getting enough cold, they're knocking their metabolism out of whack. They're leaving themselves subject to mitochondrial dysfunction. Brown fat are packed with mitochondria, where the mitochondria create too many reactive oxygen species that can damage the DNA. Mitochondria have their own DNA. There's so many things about our industrialized lifestyles that are out of whack. And one of them is we live in climate controlled environments. My ancestors are from Northern England. Like my son, he took that 23andMe test and it gives you kind of an ethnic breakdown, and his report came back and it was comical. It essentially said, you white. And that was it. It was like, you're 60% English and, 30% Scottish with a little bit of Scandinavian or something like it. It's just all one big white. And he gets that from me. We're supposed to be cold. My ancestors hated it. I remember my grandmother telling me about the Pilgrims, because remember, my parents are from New England, and what they went through in search of religious freedom and that kind of thing. Man, if you gave them central heating, they would have taken it, because we're hardwired by biology to seek comfort. The difference is I'm not a pilgrim. I've never lived through the hardships that my ancient ancestors dealt with. And as a result, my body is weaker. I must seek intentional discomfort to keep my body strong. Or as I age, I will develop these maladies. We don't even think of them as abnormalities anymore because they're so common. But these disorders like type 2 diabetes or obesity, or in my case, an inflamed prostate. Now I practice probably 5 days a week in the winter, sometimes more often in the summer. I'll be in there for 2.5 to 4 minutes a day lately because it's been cool here in Phoenix. And there's always an anxiety for me. I keep my forge at 34 degrees. If I'm not scared, then I'm not getting all the psychological benefits. And what's my reward? I've met Michael Porter, Brain Tap Technologies. He would be a great guest. And he has this, it helps you meditate. It's a light and sound immersive virtual reality experience, but there's an assessment that goes with it in which he tells you your brain age. And I go through his thing. He says, I'm 32 years old. And I'm like, Michael, that can't be right. So I saw him a few weeks ago. This is now 9 months apart. He runs me through his assessment again. I'm getting an EEG and whatever else he does with his software. He goes, congratulations, Tom. In the last 9 months, you've aged 2 years in reverse. You're now 30. And for me, I'm a professor, keeping my brain young. My whole identity is wrapped up in that. It's been wonderful.
Of course.
Yeah.
Wow.
I think it's so interesting because, my parents, I'm from Central America, and, my parents live here half the time and then they go back home to Nicaragua. And over there's no heated water, so they have to take cold showers, and it's every time I go over there, it's so uncomfortable, but you adjust. And my parents are pretty healthy. I mean, in addition to their diet and them working out, still they have those cold showers that they have to take, and this goes against everything that I grew up with, the cold showers, because Hispanic panic, like, you're not supposed to go out in the cold, you got to bundle up, and it's funny that, success is uncomfortable. You have to put yourself in that corner of uncomfortability to grow, and then also the mindset, just getting in there and being anxious, but then being okay and overcoming that. I just finished a 4-day fast this week, and on Thursday I was like dying, and I have to cook dinner. Yeah, and I had to cook dinner for my daughters, and I'm just like watching all this, vegetables and everything I was cooking for them. I'm like, oh, this looks so good, but you have to overcome that, and I also want to compliment you on your logo. I watched the whole video, and it was just amazing how you put it all together, and it's just so it's very heartfelt because you put a lot of thought into it. It wasn't just something that you threw out there, and I love how you said that the blue on top, like the winds of change, will bring about different modalities of treatment that people aren't even aware of, so I think it's so important as we start diverting away from so much Western medicine, that we start seeing all these other therapies that people can do, like that's the future, like, light therapies, ice, water immersion, all that. So I thought it was pretty amazing. And then the 3 hydras that you all represent, which is just amazing.
Kildy, thank you for watching that video and for mentioning it, because you're one of 58 people who have seen it on YouTube. And I think I'm 49 of those people, because I designed that logo, and it has a lot of meaning to us. We could have, nowadays you start a company and you're supposed to call it like best ice cold plunge tub for you, or something totally Chinese, so that the search engines all recognize it and you move up. Google hates our company name, Morozko Forge. You go and you look at ice bath, and we're going to be ranked, number 29 on the 3rd page or something. And you'll see all the other, more literal names that are search engine optimized, but they don't mean anything. And we wanted a metaphor. The forge is where you use temperature to temper steel and reshape it. And we're like, okay, Morozko is the winter warlock character. So we're going to use the cold, and we're going to use temperature to remake ourselves and our bodies and our brains and live more like the kinds of lives that we aspire to, or that we admire. So explain that whole metaphor, because we didn't start this company as some kind of a get rich quick scheme. We started the company because we wanted to change our lives. We realized that we weren't the only ones that wanted that.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think that's how most start, because I have a little side business, of herbs and soaps, and it started because I wanted to change my daughter. She was diagnosed with eczema, peanut allergies, all these little other things.
Oh boy.
And it always starts with strong intent. It's a very heartfelt. So you start something because it's really personal to you, and I sold tinctures and stuff. And my sister said, oh, like you really gotta, sell a little bit more expensive. And I said, no, I really want to help people. My intent is a little different. So I think when you start a business with a heartfelt intent as opposed to money driven, I think the success, they always say, pursue your passion and you'll succeed, so yeah, it's definitely
one of the things I learned, I was at one of my son's endocrinology appointments, and back in the day, you'd sit in the doctor's office or the dentist's office or something, and they would have magazines on the table. I don't know if anybody does that anymore, but I'm sitting there and I'm waiting for the endocrinology appointment, and they have the Reader's Digest. Do you remember this? They have great cartoons. And in Reader's Digest, there was an article about vitamin D and infancy and diabetes. And so you can imagine, I'm sitting there reading that the risk of type 1 diabetes goes way up if the child is not getting enough vitamin D in their first year of life. Well, my son was born in October, and we lived up in the mountains, about 1,700 feet. It was cold. He's not getting any sunshine. And I thought, the guilt that I felt, like I should have somehow known, my intuition should have somehow fixed his diet, gotten him the sun he needed, fed my wife the eggs and the other dietary sources of vitamin D that she would need so that her breast milk would nourish him. And I felt terrible. And I can't do anything about his type 1 diabetes, but I can fix your type 2 in less than 10 days. You give me 10 days and a forge, and I will get your insulin sensitivity up. I will bring your blood sugars down. We're now gathering information from our customers. They're sending in blood glucose readings, and it's wonderful. I met a woman she wasn't fat. She was very thin. She's done an article on our website. She has a 12% body fat and an HbA1c of 7.2, which is full on type 2 diabetic, but not anymore because she got her diet right. She started some cold exposure, and now she's less than 6, low 5s where she ought to be, although she hasn't been tested in, I don't know, over a year. We can replicate that. Type 2 diabetes is reversible, and it doesn't take very long. It just takes a little bit of courage. So part of me is still on this mission, even though it's not going to help my son. It's a different, say, get your vitamin D, get your cold exposure, do everything you can to be as healthy as you can, and take responsibility for it in here. Now, maybe that's just my own trauma and my own guilt working it out. But in the meantime, a lot of people are educating themselves, learning things, and making their lives better as a result of that knowledge. This is why all of our articles are free. We put them up on the website. You don't have to be a customer. And you don't need to buy a forge. A forge is very expensive. I mean, we now have 31 employees. They're counting on us. And last month, February, was the first time we turned a profit. Now that's magnificent. We can't help anybody if we don't make enough money to pay everybody. But what I'm saying is, if it's a cold shower, or if it's buying ice from the store, if it's winter swimming like Dean Hall did, just get yourself some cold. Now, everybody's a little bit different. My makeup is I need a lot of cold. And I think it does depend, when we get the health and human services recommendations, it's as if everybody was the same, and they're not. My ancestral background is different from Frank's, which is different from yours. And when you think about what our successful, like great grandparents had to live and survive, it's not the same for everybody. So you kind of got to go back several generations and say, what was their life like? And many people, like me in particular, are so detached from what was it like for their great grandparents, that they don't even have any of that ancestral knowledge. Kelly, it sounds like you're in a better position because you can talk to your grandparents about what are they doing in Nicaragua? What are the traditional foods? How do you prepare them? How do you keep them? That kind of thing.
Yeah, definitely. And it's so interesting also that you brought about how being in uncontrolled climates makes us so uncomfortable, because I've heard this before, that you just have to, like, during the heat waves, we want to blast the AC. When it's cold, we want to blast the heater. And that's not necessarily good for you, So it's interesting that you brought up too. And then the brown fat. I had no idea that as we age, we lose that brown fat that we're born with between our shoulder blades.
Exactly.
It's just, I had no idea about that. And I had no idea that it could be replenished either. So it's just amazing. All these things that are out there that could fix us, when we lose it all in the beginning because of our diet and everything else that we're exposed to in, environmental elements, the air, the water, our foods, so yeah. Definitely.
Frank's a dad now. I had the good fortune of meeting his son, and it reminds me, we have this term called baby fat. And we're like, oh, the kids will grow out of it. There literally is baby fat. It's the brown fat that the infants are born with to keep them warm. And now we've forgotten what it's like. Your son is going to experience this, Frank. When I was a kid, we go running around in the water and outdoors in the snow, and our parents always say, oh, put on a coat, I'm not cold, Mom. I don't feel cold. Well, we didn't. I mean, not to the same extent that our parents. I'm not saying it's good advice, right? Put on a hat. But the fact is that children don't feel it the same way that their parents do, because they have much more efficient thermogenetic metabolism. They can generate their own heat better than we can now that we're old.
So I have a two-part question now that we segued into that. And I want to hear your take on it. I have my take, but I want to hear the professional's take. Can being exposed to cold give you a cold? And then the other part of that question is, being that we're living in a day and time where society is being fully brainwashed into this one-size-fits-all approach to our immune system, how does cold exposure help us with building our immune system? So I think now, I always say to people, like, if your lifestyle looks exactly the same way it did 2 years ago prior to our world changing, then shame on you. Like, you should have learned now that, like, you have to take some pretty radical steps to make yourself healthy and give your immune system, get your immune system to a level of being bulletproof. So that's a big important thing for me. Like my forge is really it's really getting cold now. We went out there this morning and there was a chunk of ice floating on the top, so we're almost there.
All right.
And my son is like, when I was doing my cold plunges in Idaho in the lake, he wanted to come in.
I bet.
He wanted to come in at 2 years old. He really
He wants to
wanted
do
come
what
in.
you're doing. Yeah, he
Right.
wants to be like dad.
So I mean, and I've heard things. I mean, again, maybe you can elaborate on this, but I heard back in like the 40s and 50s and 60s, even in like countries like Russia, like they would actually make the kids go outside during playtime, during school, in just a t-shirt, for like 5 minutes, and they really believe traditionally
Yep.
that it helped build their immune system.
Yep.
So that's my two-part question. Does being exposed to cold give you a cold, and how does the cold help with boosting the immune system?
They're really the same question, I think, because they both relate to viral infection and the immune system. So let's talk about them as if it were one question.
Okay.
We talk about deliberate cold exposure. When you're in the sauna can also be very healthy, and people crank it up to 180 degrees in a Finnish sauna. Our sauna only goes up to 145. We got one of those infrareds, and for a lot, that's not really hot enough when I come out of the forge. If I want a sauna, I'll go sit in the parking lot in the car in Phoenix. There's probably 170 in my car. But don't do that accidentally. Heat kills people. Cold kills people. So even though we talk about cold exposure, we can't skip the deliberate part. In our method, there is no coercion. There is no bullying. There's no yelling at you. You must go in of your own volition with intention. You come out whenever you're ready, and there's no shaming or no expectation that we project on people. So we got a video. I think it was the 9-second ice bath, and it's not the shortest on record, but this woman, she was with my daughter. Brought it to Krav Maga class, and after Krav Maga, they're all going to try the ice bath. She went in and she popped out like she looked like Wile E. Coyote in one of those cartoons, defying gravity. Well, good on her, because she had the courage to get in. She's already confronted the anxiety. There's no expectation of performance. It must be deliberate cold exposure. So when you're accidental cold exposure, yeah, it can make you sick. Just like accidental heat exposure can kill you. But deliberate cold exposure is different. When COVID hit, this is, let's go back to March 2020. And I work in disaster response. I work in resilient infrastructure. How do we adapt around the disasters? That's my job at ASU. So I'm connected to some people who are really well versed, and some of them work in hospital infrastructure. We started having these conversations, and some of my most prestigious learned colleagues were telling me, oh my gosh, this is terrible. This is the big one. Everything's going to change. Wow, that sounded scary. Well, I also work in entrepreneurship, and I know some people in Silicon Valley who are very well connected, very wealthy, very successful, and they were saying the same thing. But my girlfriend, the one who treated her type 2 diabetes with diet and cold exposure, she said, nope, Tom, it's all crap. And I'm like, hang on, honey, these people, very learned, these people, tremendous credentials. And she said, nope, I don't believe any of it. She said, so I go, why not? She said, because I've looked at the data. We went on the CDC website, and she showed me where she looked up influenza-like illness reports in the fall of 2019. And sure enough, by Thanksgiving, so this is late November 2019, there were over 100,000 unexplained influenza-like illness reports a week. They tested negative for all 9 known strains of flu. Well, what do you think people were reporting this influenza-like illness for, in late November that wasn't the flu? And she goes, tell me that wasn't COVID. COVID has been here for months, she said. And that curve that everybody wants to flatten, it's already flat. Well, what it flattened was the economy. And our business was caught up in that, because nobody knew, like all the biohacking people, they didn't know what to tweet anymore. They didn't know what was going on. Nobody was ordering ice baths. And we were sitting around. Adrian asked me, Well, I think what people really need is they need to know about COVID and their immune system. And can't you figure that out? I'm like, Adrian, I'm an engineer. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm a doctor of philosophy. But if nobody's ordering ice baths, then I might as well do something. I started reading about vitamin D. We published AJK. You can look her up on Twitter. We published her article, The Curve is Already Flat, on Morozko Forge. And it was a revelation. People read that article and all of a sudden things began to make sense. They were looking for it on Google, so our web visibility went up. People had confidence to order ice baths. Why? Because when you do cold exposure in a deliberate way, you get a big immune system boost. You get this boost in your, they're called natural killer, NK cells. You can measure in your blood serum the boost to your immune system that you're getting. And we put an article up there on that. And everybody became concerned with taking charge of their own health. So what am I saying? I started putting everybody on vitamin D supplements because our research showed that the seasonality of the flu is not because it's cold in the winter. I mean, it is cold in the winter, and it's not because people are cooped up inside or something. It's because 80% of America is vitamin D deficient. The cold is good for your immune system, but it cannot make up for poor diet. It cannot make up for this poor general overall health. Get yourself vitamin D, get yourself some cold exposure. And as it turns out, I've been tested 9 times for COVID. I can't get this thing. Like 2 antibody tests, 7, spit tests. It's ASU developed it. It's our own proprietary test. But because I'm in the classroom all the time, I got to get tested. Every single one of them is a negative for the last 2 years. So my program of cold exposure and vitamin D seems to be working for me. What we've discovered is everybody's now in charge of their own health. You thought, talk to your doctor and ask them if these side effects are right for you. You thought that you could trust this relationship. And most of our customers are like, I'm not leaving it to chance anymore.
Sure.
So can cold give you a cold? Well, yeah. And can cold help boost your immune system? Well, yeah. You do it intentionally, and you do not do it to excess.
Gotcha. Got it. Yeah. So you mentioned before when you went for your friend told you how your brain actually reversed, right? Like it's getting younger. So when you said that, I thought of I wanted to ask you this. I read an article, I don't know, maybe it's about 1.5 years ago now, 2 years ago. It was a study done in the UK, but they were finding that when people had excuse me, when people had exposure to cold, they found that shock, right? That surge through the body, when they experienced that, they found that it actually helped decrease certain proteins that were found on the brain, which then led them to believe that could cold exposure actually help prevent Alzheimer's and dementia.
Yep.
What can you elaborate on that? Because that's the only thing I've heard about that through that article and that study.
My mother suffers from Alzheimer's. I'm not over this, Frank. I still have some anger. I still got my, mental health issues about the way I was raised. But the anger melts away when I see pictures of her now. I haven't seen her. She was in a nursing home in New York State, so you can imagine what that was like. And I haven't seen her in years, and she doesn't recognize me, which is very painful. But Alzheimer's comes from, you could say multiple causes. One of the phenomena that's consistent with Alzheimer's is buildup of plaque in the brain. That is a metabolic disorder. We have 2 customers with multiple sclerosis. Sclerosis is a plaque buildup. We hear about arterial sclerosis. Sclerosis means, and they got multiple buildup of plaque, in particular, demyelation of their nervous system. Okay. Mm-hmm. They use cold exposure to manage their symptoms. Can't reverse their disease. But we had one, he's a former Navy SEAL. He was wheelchair bound until he started deliberate cold exposure. Now he does workout videos on Instagram. You can look him up. His name is Justin Hoagland, Hoagland. And I think he's no joke 44 on Instagram, and he's an incredible inspiration. So one thing, I mean, sometimes they call Alzheimer's type 4 diabetes because the metabolic disorder is highly correlated with Alzheimer's. Now, there's also a brain health aspect of this. One of the most amazing things that we've discovered is the psychological benefits of deliberate cold exposure. Put a new article up last month about a winter swimming club in Britain, and the way that when you do, getting outdoors is good for you no matter what, but when you combine that with cold exposure, it lifts the mood and it lifts depression. Frankly, there's some good studies coming out of a British university on this. And there's one that Andrew Huberman first alerted me to. So he does a lot of science-based stuff on his podcast, on his Instagram feed. And every time he talks about cold exposure, I got new homework assignments. I got to go look up some more papers in the library. And sure enough, one of them shows a 250% boost. So this is 3.5 times the dopamine levels in the bloodstream after deliberate cold exposure. That ecstasy that I feel when I come out of the forge, it's not an accident. It's not a placebo. It is a whole bunch of norepinephrine and dopamine coursing through my system and reaching my brain that I can't help but feel good. There's something called ice face. My daughter is famous for this. She'll get in and she'll be, it takes about 30 seconds for that norepinephrine to hit your brain. And you're in pain and your toes hurt and you're miserable and you can't help but smile because it becomes involuntary. The brain is feeling so good, even if the toes are feeling so miserable. Now, whether that inhibits or whether that protects against Alzheimer's, I don't know. The metabolic benefits, I think, are much more important than the mood benefits. When I look at my mother now, I wish that she hadn't been eating what she was feeding me her whole life. She never went low carb. She never gave up the seed oils. She read her books, and she, to this day, thinks that margarine, I mean, I don't really know what she thinks because her brain is so gone, but she never changed her eating habits in response to what we've learned since the early 70s about what good nutrition really constitutes. And this is where the anger comes back up, not so much towards her anymore, but towards the people like Ansel Keys, who perpetrated the lies about nutrition that made industrial agriculture and food processors rich at the expense of our own health. We're now able, thank goodness for the internet, thank goodness for the library, we're now able to tease through and find the truth in the data and the studies. There are 2 books in particular. One of them on insulin resistance is written by Ben Bickman. He's a PhD, not a medical doctor. I believe he's in Utah, University of Utah. It's called Why We Get Sick. Recommend it highly. It's going to convince you that 8 out of the 10 leading causes of death in the United States are due to the same thing, insulin resistance, and Alzheimer's is one of those. The other one is called Big Fat Surprise. Tina Neinholtz, if I'm saying her last name wrong, then I apologize, Tina, but Big Fat Surprise, she's at Big Fat Surprise on Twitter. And she talks about Ansel Keys and the mythology of the Mediterranean diet and how poisonous seed oils are for you. So you want to take care of your brain, a great place to start is taking care of your diet.
In general, yeah. I mean,
right.
We say that a lot of what's going on internally, it manifests externally, and you got to keep that elasticity of the brain going and stuff. So not only brain exercises, your graphs and what's not, but yeah, definitely. I'm hearing more and more about seed oils as well as, how, yeah, just.
Well, you remember my son's report comes back, you white, we're pretty pale. My son's got, my blue eyes, and one of the things that I didn't know until I started seeing it on Twitter was that seed oils cause a systemic background inflammation that make me much more susceptible to sunburn. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to figure this out. I took seed oils out of my diet, and then I go out on the lake. I enjoy sailing. In particular, Lake Pleasant is where I sail. And I said, well, the only way to really test this is to test it. So it's May, and the days are pretty long in May. The sun is pretty high in the sky, even though the temperatures aren't all that warm. And most of us, we haven't been getting a lot of sunshine, but I get a little. So I have a little bit of a base, but I go out on the lake, nothing but shorts, 8 straight hours. Because I'm going to test this. It sounds dangerous now in retrospect, but I'm going to test this idea that I won't sunburn if I take seed oils out of my diet. And guess what, Keldy? I did sunburn a little bit on my legs. It peeled off a little in about a week. If I was on the diet I had when I was a kid, I would have been in the emergency room after 8 hours on the lake in the Arizona desert in May. When you take the seed oil, and this is how I knew that seed oils really are poison. You take them out, you reduce all the background inflammation, and your skin is so much healthier to begin with that now it's able to adapt to the harsh environment that really I'm not well acclimated to. Now I have I shouldn't say no seed oil. Sometimes when I'm traveling, it's really hard because they're ubiquitous in restaurants. But I avoid the salad dressing and the fried foods when I can. And I won't have any seed oils in my kitchen. And I have a vitamin D lamp. So I'm never totally away from my UV exposure. I'll always have a little bit of background, and it helps keep my vitamin D levels up.
Right.
Yeah. And it's like, I think this all comes full circle, right? It's like, in order for us to be truly healthy, it's like I always say to people, you have to find comfort in the uncomfortable, right? And that's what like cold exposure has taught me. That's what fasting has taught me. That's what weight training has taught me. That's what breath work has taught me. In order to earn optimal health, you have to be able to embrace uncomfortability. Like that's where it really births itself, and hearing you say all this stuff, it kind of like brings all of it like back home. It's like everything we do when it comes to what we eat, what we do, what we think, should be a focal point of like, how do I minimize stress in my life? And by minimizing the stress, we then minimize the inflammation in our body. And if we minimize the inflammation in our body, as we heard from Dr. Seager, a lot of other things kind of start to fall in place.
But I'm going to disagree with you for a second, Frank. When you say minimize stress, here's what I disagree with. There is distress, which is bad, but there's also something called eustress, which is good. Some stress is beneficial, and you know this because you work out. You're in such great shape when
and that is stress.
Right, and so I don't want people to get the wrong idea. There's a particular kind of stress, distress. Your resting periods are as important as your working periods. Like rest is part of, and recovery part of your workout. Now, where people stumble is, how do I know when I've crossed out of eustress, which is good for me, and into distress? And a lot of times we can't trust our own feelings about something. This happens when people say, oh, I hate the cold. I can't stand the cold. And I'm going, well, that's why you should get in. And they think I'm some kind of sadist. That's not what I'm going for. You cannot trust your own feelings to know whether the stress has gone too far. Kelly McGonigal wrote a book. She gave a very popular TED talk about stress and how to make stress your friend. She says, the most important thing is the story you tell yourself about the stress. So let me see if I can explain that. She did a study, or maybe she didn't do it, but she cited it, where they talked to people who led stressful lives. And then they looked up later about who was in the obituaries. The people who talked about their stress in a way that said, well, this is a difficult time in my life and I'm going to get through it and I'll be stronger for it, lived much longer than the people who said, oh my God, the stress is killing me. When you say the stress is killing me, it literally is, because the story you tell yourself is much more important than the experience you had. So how do you know when you've entered distress is the most difficult thing for anyone to self-assess? Because we want to tell ourselves good stories about our stress, and that way we get more benefit from it. And yet we are human. We have limits. We are not supposed to punish ourselves to the point of actually making our health worse. Your body has a way of talking to you. When your knees are, when you get tendonitis, when your shoulders are giving out and your knees are saying, don't go running today, they might be right. Maybe today's an ice bath day and not a running day. So one of the things that I've learned to do is try and listen to my body and say, what is that sore throat telling me? Is there something that I'm struggling to talk about? Is there, am I choking on my word? I'm saying, what if my body was checking in, reporting to me, my back hurts, lower back? Is that a lack of support? Oh, my shoulders are sore. Am I carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders? What is this? Goes back to our logo, Keldy. What is the metaphor for the pain? And then what is the source of the pain? Rather than taking an NSAID or some other poison for taking your inflammation down or reducing your pain, what is the relationship between the story that you're telling yourself, the brain, and what is your body trying to tell your brain? Which is a long-winded way of saying we need stress and we need discomfort. I don't want to minimize it. If I can, I want to optimize it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess it's pushing through that challenge and seeing how you react to it, basically, in the end,
Let your body talk to you. Sometimes when I'm in the forge, we got some good brainwave data on how it puts your brain into a deep meditative state. And I can't meditate for crap because my brain is always going. I mean, this is the way I was trained as an academic. I'm always working on something. So I'll be on the yoga mat and I'll be doing the breathing and I'll say like, no, I don't think that's the way entropy really works. If we did the closed loop integral around the control volume, because I can't meditate for nothing. But when I go into the forge, the brain waves, they dip down into the meditative state. And one of the things that I will do, I learned this from one of Dispenza's books, is like a body scan. Okay, check in with my gut. Intestines, how are you doing? Check in with my liver. Liver, how are you doing? Check in with my lungs. Are you guys feeling okay? And this came out in a story that my daughter, who practices deliberate cold exposure, she told when she was at Krav Maga. We check in with our body parts, and when one of them is pain, we learn to send love to that body part. I had a toe problem. It was very embarrassing because when I looked it up, it sounded like gout. And I'm like, gout, that's a metabolic disorder. What's going on? No, there's something called pseudo gout. And, I was doing my research with friends at the Naval Postgraduate School. I do a lot for the Defense Department, and I couldn't walk around campus because my toe hurt so bad. And I was angry at my toe. But then when I went to bed that night, I remember what my daughter and I do: send love to the toe. Toe, we need you. We want you on the team. How do we help you get better? Use the brain to talk back to the toe. So my daughter did this in Krav Maga. She was sparring with some of the black belts way over her head. And I can't remember exactly what she said happened, but she, boom, lost control of her knee, went down on the floor, knees twisted, banged it, and everybody stopped because they're not there to hurt anybody. But instead of like, oh, are you okay? Oh, can I help? Like they didn't know what to say because she was on the mat and she was kissing her knee. And she's like, it's okay. I love you, knee. And the black belts were like, what is happening? We do this because
somebody get this hippie out of here.
Right. It's supposed to be tough Krav Maga. And she's like, no, it's going to be okay. Do you need anything? I love you. How can I help you heal? Whereas a lot of athletes will feel betrayed by the injury because they can't perform. She flipped it around and she says, love that part of your body that needs the help. So in the forge, I'm doing that body scan. I'm checking in and I'm saying, hey, do you need anything? Knees, do you need anything? Ankles, how you doing today? Hamstrings? And the hamstrings are like, yeah, Dr. Seager, we need something. I've been stretching my hamstrings enough. So yeah, it's all hippie foo-foo, like you can throw it out. But I'm meditating now. So I've read that's good for me.
Well, Adrian, on the website, on your website, Adrian has all those podcasts that walk you through, and I was just like, oh my gosh, this is amazing because you're not left alone. You're not given, an appliance and said, okay, go ahead now. You got to do what you got to do. But she actually helps you, and I was listening to some of them and I was like, oh, this is kind of relaxing because I don't meditate either. I pray at night, but,
that's good for you too. But you are so right. One of the things that we discovered is we were starting to sell to athletes. And the professional athletes are pretty tough. They have extremely high tolerance for pain, and they're using it mostly for exercise recovery so they can go out and perform. But it doesn't work. There's a good video, friend of my daughter's, former student of mine, Nicole. Nicole was a bodybuilder. She won her first, bikini bodybuilding competition. She knew she was tough, and she goes into that cold and she's like, I'm going to tough it out. Well, we got football players and baseball players, pro athletes, same attitude. It's a mental toughness kind of thing. You got to surrender to the cold. 45 seconds is about the longest I've seen anyone with that attitude last, and it doesn't matter. These are linemen in the NFL, starting like all-star major league pitchers. And until Adrian takes them aside and says, we're going to try it again, and we're going to do it like this, and you're going to breathe like that, and slows everything down. Now they can do 4 or 5 minutes. So it's amazing how the cold will humble you in a way that demands your surrender. One of the things that Adrian taught me is that every cell in your body is going to be screaming bloody murder. This is killing us. Get us out of here, and you got to talk back to them because your brain is in charge, not your body. And you got to say, this is what cold feels like. And then your toes are going to say, no, this is death. You go, no. This is just cold.
Or fight response.
Exactly right. Yep.
Yeah.
And it's amazing too what the mind does. Like I had a really interesting experience, and when we were in Idaho, it was a plunge I did. I think it was like mid-December. It was snowing out. The lake was frozen. I had to crack it open with the bat and all that. But I remember sitting in there, and the sun was trying to come out, but I remember just like, again, when I'm in the water, I kind of created my own technique of just like in normal, but long and slow out.
Yeah.
Like, and I feel like it warms up my insides. But I remember like telling myself, because at one point I felt like the snow hitting my shoulders. I was like, oh my God. But then like the little bit of sun that was coming through, I was able to really like focus on the sun. And I had a moment where like I literally like felt like I convinced myself that it was like 95 degrees out. I was completely dialed into the sun, and like I like left my body in that moment, and I was just like, wow, like this is trippy. Like it was a phenomenal experience. So it just goes to show that how much our mind, and we hear this time and time again, right? It gets recycled, this message, in so many ways, so many messengers with the same message. But really the cold teaches you, like, and I always say this to people, like if you let your mind get, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I truly believe for myself, if I let my mind get to me when I'm in that cold water, I will go into hypothermia.
Yep.
If I'm able to be still and like everything is flowing. So it's like, what does that teach us about life, right? Like, and that's what, again, cold has taught me, is that like any curveballs that life throws at me, I learned to like, just, okay, I process that information of like, oh my God, what just happened? Like, I can't, like, this isn't, and then I just like, okay.
Yep.
That is so powerful. It is so powerful. It's amazing. Yeah. Your mind.
Cold water is like my Mr. Miyagi. You know what I mean? It really has taught me that, and that's why, like, we left Idaho, and we've been in Arizona now since December. But I've been taking, like, to your point, even in December, the cold showers here, like, it's like not that big of a deal. So I can't wait to get into that tub today and really start grinding back at that every day. Because when I was in the swing of doing like full body cold plunges, my life felt so much easier.
You gonna bring your son in?
I am, yeah.
Good.
Yeah, he wants to, yeah.
Yeah.
But I remember too, like years ago, and we'll kind of recap now. We'll close this out. But I remember hearing, I when I work out, I listen to a lot of those. If you go to YouTube, there's a lot of motivational YouTube videos of like workout. It has like all this exciting music, but you hear the speakers, and that's all I work out to. And I
Yeah.
remember hearing this guy, I don't know who he is, but and it's stuck with me forever. And this is what the cold water is, or fasting, or training, or any of it. If we choose to do things every day that are easy, our life becomes hard. And if we choose things that are hard every day, our life becomes easy. And that mindset really has stuck with me on so many levels of like, how do I challenge myself today? How do I do something? And I have to find new things because cold therapy, weight training, fasting were all things that were like really hard for me. Now they're just woven into the fabric of my life. Now it's just like, oh, you wake up, you brush your teeth. Oh, I don't eat for 20 hours now
In
today.
your
Like
forge. Yeah.
gorge. Like, um, so yeah, so I mean that's what I always try to tell people, like with what I do when I coach people with food, with training, with cold therapy, is like you have got to be willing to be uncomfortable. And once you start embracing that, that's when I start seeing people's health really starting to turn around. Is when you're willing to do that. The easy way out is just that, it's the easy way out, and it's not a way out if it's easy.
Have you heard that expression? Today I do what others won't, so tomorrow I can do what others can't.
Mm. No, I haven't,
Because
but that's
okay,
profound.
that's
Yeah.
up on the walls of my daughter's Krav Maga studio, and it's to remind us that whatever we're going through right now, we are going to look back on from the perspective of tomorrow. Tomorrow's coming. Did you do something yesterday that made yourself proud, or did you not? And I've never looked back on a forge and regretted it. Like where I came out of the forge and I was like, oh, why did I do that? And it's not the case with a workout. Some people will say, I've never regretted a workout, but I can't say that because there have been times when I wasn't ready or I wasn't prepared and I've hurt myself. And I said, I did not do that right. And if I could do it over again, I would have done it differently. But I'm fortunate with the ice bath. There's never been an ice bath I regretted.
Wow.
No, I can't say I've experienced that ever either. You come out there and you just feel on top of the world, euphoric. It's a
Yep.
feeling like no other. Yeah.
Euphoria is a great word for it.
Yeah. What would you say would be a good starting point for someone like me? Because I'm like, I don't do anything like this. What would you say would be a good starting point for someone who wants to start?
What do your grandparents do?
They take cold showers, and I don't even know
Ta-da!
I know, but it's room temperature, so it's not necessarily cold. I would say maybe the water temperature is probably like 50, 60, because in Nicaragua, we're talking about like, it's really
You'll
hot.
feel it. So a lot of people want to know how to get started. They'll say, well, if I go outside and I feel cold, does that count? Yeah. So we call that underdressing. You don't put on a whole winter coat. Yeah, definitely wear a hat, but then just go out in a t-shirt. Take a walk in the sunshine, because no matter where you are, you're going to get some sun. I shouldn't say no matter where you are, but even if you're in Chicago or Minnesota, there's going to be one of those winter days and it's going to be -10, but it's going to be beautiful sunshine. Go out in a t-shirt and just go for a walk. When you begin to feel a shiver, you have activated your brown fat. You've started thermogenesis. You're recruiting brown fat and you're getting all the metabolic benefits. And I don't know, everybody's a little bit different. Maybe that's 5 minutes. I went to school, Clarkson University, Northern New York. If you don't know what -40 feels like, then Clarkson is a good place to experience that. And I remember it because, I'm studying engineering. That's where it doesn't matter if it's Celsius or Fahrenheit, because the two scales cross. Your spit freezes before it'll like crackle in the air. And if all you can take is like 2 minutes, then that's great. Do 2 minutes. But if you can do 20, do 20. When the shiver begins to set in, you're getting the metabolic benefits. But here's the thing about the psychological benefits. They start before you even walk out the door, because you're getting yourself dressed and you're like, oh, what am I doing? Oh, the neighbors are going to say I'm crazy. Oh, my roommate thinks I'm an idiot. You're going out in this weather like that? All of us, you've got the anxiety. You don't know how you're going to feel. And as soon as you like make the commitment, you've overcome a psychological barrier. Doesn't, like the woman in the video, 9 seconds. That's great. Then she's getting psychological benefits because she's done something she didn't think or she didn't know that she could do until she tried it. So get started getting your cold anywhere. Then you can email me afterwards. If there's a forge near you, because we sell to a lot of small businesses, then I'll write to them and I'll say, hey, would you help Keldy just get her in there, have somebody coach her through it the first time? I'm not saying she's going to be like a lifetime subscriber, but we did a podcast. She wanted to try some cold exposure and you've got a forge. So send me a note and we'll see if we can get you arranged with somebody.
That's good. Yeah. Always about, what is it? Mental challenges and overcoming what I think I can't. I love that. You got to challenge yourself.
Yeah, like I will say this, like after what you said, Dr. Seager, like there's never been a time I've done a cold plunge and when I got out, I regretted it. But every time I'm about to go into the cold water, it's like,
hate it.
This sucks. What am I doing? Like what? Like, it's such a push pull. Like even today, like my mind, like I know that thing's gonna be ready. I'm like, oh God, like I'm scared. I'm intimidated.
Yep.
Every time the preliminary before doing it, I'm scared.
Yep.
There's never been a time. Like even taking a cold shower now, like I mean, like just getting ready to turn that dial. It's like, oh, all right, here we go.
Yep.
Like like, but then when you're done, you're like, whoa, like it's so that's the cool thing. It's something that will always challenge you mentally, no matter what, right? I mean, always.
Which is part of the beauty of it.
Yeah.
There's a phrase called anticipatory anxiety. Nothing bad has happened, but you start making a prediction about how you're going to feel in the future. And so you're anticipating a bad feeling. It creates anticipatory anxiety. Mel Robbins wrote a book called The 5-Second Rule. And it's not the rule where you still get to eat like the chip after it fell on the floor or something. She said she was at a very low point in her life. She couldn't get out of bed. She would set her alarm and the alarm would go off and she wanted to get out of bed, but she didn't feel like it. And your feelings will almost always overcome your wantings until you get in the habit of ignoring your feelings and doing your wantings. So she said she wasn't in that habit, but she invented this rule: 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and you do it. So I still look inside my forge and I'm like, oh, there's way too much ice in there for me. I could probably skip today, and my brain starts all this chatter. It's telling me all these lies because I don't feel, I want it, but I don't feel. 5, 4, and the counting down stops all that nonsense in your brain. And 1, you have nowhere left to go. Like, what am I going to do? -1, -1.5. Like, it doesn't make any sense. You have to blast off when the countdown gets to 0 and boom, you go in. So I'd read that book. And then I can't remember why I got curious, but I did a couple of videos where I cited Mel Robbins' book, and I go on TikTok and sure enough, there's Mel Robbins. And I guess she lives in Massachusetts, but she's up in Vermont or something. She's about to do an ice bath and she is complaining and she is whining about, I'm like, this is the woman who invented the whole 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 system. She did 47 seconds. Like what? And this was a winter ice bath in ice water. And I'm like, way to go. I've been telling everybody about her 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 system in good conscience. And it might slow down your brain when your brain's trying to talk you out of something that you're going to be proud of yourself for doing.
Awesome. All right. Well, in wrapping this up, I have 2 questions for you. One,
Yeah.
how do people find you and also look into the forge if they're interested? What's the website?
Morozkoforge.com. Google hates it. If you misspell it, you'll probably, still find your way for it. But Morozko, that's Morozko, and then Forge, Morozkoforge.com. The best part of the website for me is the journal. Now, I love it when people come to our store and you can buy online. You got a credit card with $10,000. We're not cheap. You can buy online. As a matter of fact, if you heard about us in this podcast, Frank, we're going to set up a coupon code. It's going to be Frank 150, FRANK 150, so that anybody who goes to our store and buys a forge, types in Frank 150, saves themselves $150. So there's that.
And I'll even throw in a free 30-minute wellness consulting session with you guys too, if you do that, if you go order that. So
I want one. I
All
want
right,
my
you got it.
30-minute wellness.
You got it. You got it.
That sounds great. But my favorite part of the website, it's called Journal. Everybody has a blog. And I can't do a blog because I got a PhD. I publish journal articles. So when it came time, I mean, we had a little bit of an argument about it, but since I'm writing the articles, Jason was like, okay, fine, call it whatever you want. You know, not everybody knows to click on journal to find the articles that I'm writing, but you want to read about depression. You want to read about vasoconstriction. You want to read about type 2 diabetes. You want to read about how my testosterone levels like went through the freaking roof when I started doing exercise after my cold exposure. Then you go to morozkoforge.com and you click on the journal tab and all the articles will be there.
Perfect. Perfect. And guys, I'll put that all wherever you're viewing this. I'll put it all in the description, the link to the website. And you're on Instagram as well. People can find you on there, right?
At Morozko Forge. Yep.
Got it. Perfect. Okay. And then I just have one other. Kelly, do you have any other questions for him?
Nope, just go
No.
check out the website. It has so much information. I loved it. I was on there for like ever, just looking at all the podcasts, you know, and reading all the testimonials. And I didn't know about the journal. I must have overlooked that, but I'm definitely gonna go check it out.
It's not the easiest to find.
Great source of information though. Great.
Thanks, Kelly.
So my last question for you then, Dr. Seager, is if you were planning on, let's see, if you were planning on leaving planet Earth and moving to Mars and saying goodbye to Earth forever and for good, what would be your final wish for planet Earth if you were never to come back for mankind?
Why am I leaving?
Just because you want something different. You want something different. But
You wanna
being
be on
able
the
to see
planet.
from like an aerial view down on Earth, knowing everything that's been going on and going on, where do you want to see mankind evolve to, like based off of where we're at now, if you had one wish?
I told you a little bit about my son with diabetes. He has a daughter. And I've spent most of my career thinking about what kind of planet is she gonna inherit. I haven't stopped. You know, it's funny because a lot of this truth on nutrition, truth on COVID, truth on health, I see people who are also, they're into Bitcoin, they correlate. They're like, these communities have a lot of overlap. And these people very critical of climate change policies. I'm not arguing like about the policy. I'm not defending existing policies, but I do know that the rate at which we are dominating our planet without an understanding of the complex systems that we're messing with is very dangerous. I'm a precautionary kind of guy. That is, I will take risks that do not cascade into catastrophe. You know I can get out of the ice bath. Some people might say, well, you're crazy to get into ice water. Well, if it's not working out, I'll get myself out and it'll be okay. I am not okay with risking the health of our planet so that my granddaughter inherits something that looks like it was in one of those 1970s dystopian, Soylent Green type science fiction movies that scared the crap out of me when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So what do I want? I want to stop thinking. I'm a teacher. I want to teach people how to think. And my whole life, the predominant paradigm has been industrial. We are separate from the environment. Then they put an astronaut into orbit, 1969, and he took a picture, sent it back to Earth, and it's called Earthrise because it's taken from space. And for the first time, we could see the Earth as just like this self-contained, tiny little fragile blue dot surrounded by, it no longer seemed infinite. What I want to teach is that the way we have to think about our place on this world, before I hypothetically leave it, is that we are not separate from the Earth. We are one with it in an interdependent, complex system that requires us to take care of it, because we're expecting it to take care of us.
Symbiotic relationship, definitely.
Mm-hmm. There's a concept called ecosystem health that I haven't published on maybe in 20 years. We think of health as existing at the level of the organism, like I'm an organism, but it also exists at a higher level, at the level of all of the interdependent organisms together. This is an ecosystem concept of health. So I'm not done learning about health, both at the individual scale and at this larger systemic scale.
Right, right.
Beautifully said. Got it.
Thanks, Frank.
Well, again, always a pleasure to hear you speak, and thank you for joining us. We really appreciate your time. I know you got a
This has
very
been my
busy
pleasure.
schedule,
Thanks for
so
asking. Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you so
Um,
much.
yeah, and everyone listening, I don't know what you're doing with your life, but jump into some cold water when you're ready. That's all I can say. Check it out at morozkoforge.com. Check out Dr. Seager on Instagram, on the Morozko Forge page as well. And that is it, guys. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you on the next episode. Thanks again, guys. Have a great day.
It's been a pleasure.